Hey everyone, welcome back. For today, we're doing day 8 dictionaries and maps. And similar to the previous session, we are introducing a new data structure, which is a dictionary. And a dictionary in Python is really a hash table under the hood. And we are allowed to have key value pairs. And this data structure is ideal if you wish to do a lookup based on the key and you want to get the associated value with that key. So for this task, we're given n names and phone numbers, and we have to assemble a phone book that maps a friend's name to their respective phone numbers. And in this case, we're given an unknown number of names to query the phone book for, and for each name queried, we'll have to print the associated entry from the phone book in the format name equals the phone number. And if an entry for name is not found, then we'll print not found instead. So in this case, the phone book should be a dictionary map or hash map data structure, and in Python it's just a dictionary. So the input is like so. The first line is integer, denoting the number of entries in the phone book, and each of the n subsequent lines denote an entry in the form of two space-separated values on a single line. And the first value in that space-separated line is the name, and the second is the phone number. So afterwards, we will be given a random number of lines that has a certain name, and we have to check whether if this name exists in the phone book or not. So this is pretty much a combination of what we have learned thus far regarding if-else statements. We will throw in one additional data structure as well, and that's pretty much it. So let's get started. The first thing that we have to read in is the number of inputs to be saved into the phone book. And before we start reading that in, perhaps let's initialize the phone book itself. So before we start, I'll be importing the type hint for a dictionary, and it's like this. And I will define the phone book as a dictionary, which maps a string to a string. And this is how we will initialize a dictionary. The next thing is to define and read in the input tree, in this case for n, and let's just call this n, and let's read in the first line, strip it of any excess new line characters or spaces on the left and right, although there should not be any, but let's just do that to be sure. Once we're done, cast it to an integer, and we're ready to use this n. So for row in range n, in this case we'll be iterating n times with this range object over here. And for every single row, we would read in the current row. And in this case, this current row would consist of the line itself, which is an input like this. And once we are done, let's define a name followed by the phone number. And now that we have these two types, we can have both the phone number and the name by splitting this current row by an empty space, and this allows us to get the name as well as the phone number. Once that is done, we can save this name as the key in this phone book and associate that with the phone number as the value like this. Now we have successfully managed to read in, for example, these 3 lines of name to phone number pairings, and the next thing that we have to do is start checking for whether if there are names on every single subsequent row that we see. So to do that, let's keep track of the current line that we're reading in with a certain variable. So let's say current line equals to string, and let this be the next input. So in this case, let's say this current line will be currently assigned to Sam. And now, I guess this is a good time to give you a little trick on how we can check if a line is an empty string or not. And if it's an empty string, in this case, this conditional statement would not be executed. An empty string is really a false when placed in the conditional statement like this. And let's print cheese. And the demonstration of this is to show you that you can see that there's no response on the standard output. So that means this was not printed and this was evaluated to be false. So with that, what we can do is we can do while current line. In other words, if the current line is not empty, do something about it. And in this case, we can get the current name from the current line by doing current line.strip like this. And once we are done, we can check whether if this current name is inside the phone book. So let's say current phone number. In this case, I'll be introducing a new type hint, which is called optional. And optional represents whether if this value is possible to be assigned to none. So in this case, this will be an optional of a string. And what we are doing is we're doing phonebook.get current name. And what this does is we would check whether if the current name key exists in the phone book. And if it exists, we would get the corresponding value from the phone book, which is the phone number. But if it doesn't exist, then this would be assigned to none. So if it is a none value, if current phone number exists, then in this case, we can print out the string formatted name associated with each phone number. So as it was explained in the question, we are supposed to format it as current name equals to current phone number. And if the current phone number doesn't exist, in other words, if it is assigned to none, then we will print not found. And at this point, after we are done, we would have to assign the current line to the next input. Okay, so there everything is fine, but there is an issue. It is possible for us to call input at the end of the file or the end of the input right here. So that will give us an end of file error. And to prove that's the case, let's run this code and we will encounter an end of file error. And as you can see, the reason why it crashes is because we're trying to read in a new input line, but there is no more lines to be read. So we actually get an end of file error. So what we want to do when we encounter this error is to recover from it and just assign the current line to an empty string so that we will break out of this while loop over here. So to do that, we can use the try catch block like this. And this tells Python that, hey, if you happen to encounter this end of file error, perform this following recovery logic to hopefully recover from it. So in this case, if we encounter an end of file error, we will just set the current line to an empty string so that once this is repeated on line 18, then this conditional will not be achieved and the while loop would stop. So in this case, we're done. Now let's run this code. This passed all the test cases. Let's run this against the rest of the test cases. And there we go. We managed to succeed in implementing a good implementation for this question. So in summary, we got comfortable with using the dictionary data structure, and this is how we would define a dictionary data structure. We then recapped on how we will use the split function to split a certain string into two values like this, and we deconstructed this tuple, this list of strings into two separate variables like this. The first value in this split, which contains a list of size 2, the first element is given to name, the second element is given to the phone number. And what we did is we assigned this name as a key inside our phone book and assigned the phone number to the corresponding value. And what we did afterwards is we got comfortable with input parsing, where we check whether if a current line is not an empty string, and if it's not an empty string, we will get the current name, perform some string cleaning before we check whether if it exists in the phone book, and we did some f-string formatting to get the right input out to the console. And that's pretty much it. Oh yes, one final one. We learned how to use try and accept statements to recover from any runtime errors that we encounter. So that's pretty much it for this question. If you find this useful, please give us a like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.